Today, let's dive into the world of Cornish witchcraft and folklore as I visit the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic in Boscastle for my birthday in August. I also visited some witchy shops in Cornwall while we were there as well. So get yourself a nice hot drink, settle back, relax, and enjoy. In the words of Cecil Williamson, "For the witch, death holds a strange fascination. Each and every one of us is born to die, but is death a final end to life? The witch says no, for she knows that there are other places and other things. Her whole life and being is devoted to the ever-present but unseen world of spirit. To the witch, the spirit world is a reality, a living thing. To her, everything has a spirit, a soul, a personality, be it animal, mineral, vegetable. That is why, to us, in the southwest, we know and believe in the little people. Oh, you may laugh, my fine up-country folk, but beware, for you, indeed, are in the land where ghoulies and ghosties and long-legged beasties still romp, stomp, and go bump in the night. Come, let us show you what the witches and their spirits do." Cecil Williamson. Nestled in the heart of the charming North Cornish harbour village of Boscastle is the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic, which boasts one of the largest and most intriguing collections of witchcraft tools, folklore, and esoteric artifacts. Cecil Williamson was fascinated by witchcraft and magic as a young child. The museum was founded in 1951. Cecil Williamson initially founded the museum in Stratford-upon-Avon, then moved to the Isle of Man, where the Folklore Centre of Superstition and Witchcraft was opened, and then finally in 1960 settled in Boscastle and reopened the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic. The founder of Wicca, Gerald Gardner, was very prominent at the museum and was known as the resident witch. The museum will frequently showcase seasonal exhibits. The resident collection that remains winds through the building in these small little rooms, and it's really beautiful and very quaint and whimsical. As you walk through the rooms, the exhibits chronicle the way in which the witch has been perceived through the modern zeitgeist and cultural depictions of the witch throughout recent decades. A large portion of the museum is dedicated to exploring the role of the cunning folk or the wise woman and the role that these individuals would have played within society, especially within the West Country in Devon and in Cornwall. Whilst we now might call these practitioners witches, they themselves most likely would not have identified in that way because that word had negative connotations. Therefore, those who would have been consulted, village practitioners, would have been wise women, cunning men, charmers, fairy doctors. Visitors would come to their cottages, which often were on the edge of society, on the edge of towns, and seek assistance for a illness or problem or a condition. Due to the ways in which the English countryside developed, Cornwall became rather cut off from the rest of the country, which Devon didn't so much, but Cornwall is still fairly rural. Many of these traditions still go on today. The rise of witchcraft was very much due to Gerald Gardner's craft and work in the mid-20th century. Whilst there are claims there that there is a long-standing tradition that Gerald Gardner pulled from, that has been debunked. Essentially, that Gardner pulled together threads of practices, folklore and traditions that he was able to find and wove it together with similar practices from the Golden Dawn and other grimoire traditions to form Wicca, which is a modern neo-pagan tradition, religion, spiritual practice. However, it is believed that these wise women or folk healers, cunning men, charmers, folk magical practitioners would inherently have been of dual faith and would have continued to practice their traditions of wart cunning and utilising herbs for healing, etc., alongside Christianity. As a result, there is a lot of psalm magic incorporated, as well as verses from the Bible, a connection to the spirit world, pacts with the old one, or old horny, or the witch's devil, as well as petitions to God and saints, the angels, the Holy Ghost, etc. What still remains is that the word witch is maligned and considered to be malevolent. Of course, there are many of us reclaiming that word, feeling the power in it. However, that stigma is still remaining today. And so cunning folk, wise woman, folk practitioner may be words that resonate for you more deeply. And it certainly describes the nature of the work performed by these cunning men, charmers, pellers, wise women, etc. Throughout the museum, you can see ritual tools, including traditional wands, athames, ritual knives, chalices, cauldrons, amulets, talismans, charms, witch bottles, poppets, divination tools, etc. I find the most intriguing aspect of the museum to be the cabinets, which display the poppets, cursing tablets, and effigies, the use of witch bottles, charms, and curses that have been found across Cornwall and further beyond. It really demonstrates some of the ways in which these practitioners would practice, because they would get their hands dirty. Whilst we don't know for sure, it's likely that that's not across the board, but some certainly would have utilised their power to curse, or would have petitioned spirits, the Holy Ghost, to support them in those endeavours. Of course, each practitioner would have their different ways of practising. They would have slightly different surroundings, as they would have been based in different places. Naturally, much of the magic would have been in the rural landscape, and in particular plants, plant spirits, land spirits, etc. within the area. A lot of the magic of the land, sea and sky is in that liminal aspect, the betwixt and between of spaces, the solitary places, the hedges and the cliffs and the woodlands, the caves, etc. So there's much to explore within Cornwall. My experience living in Devon is that the roads are very, very windy in Cornwall, and it does take a really, really long time to get to different places, and they're really small roads and things are a lot more remote than they are in Devon, but there are some really magical places. There are well-known traditions that do work well in the area, of course, because Gerald Gardner was associated with the museum, with Cecil Williamson. There is that aspect of Gardnerian or Alexandrian Wiccan perspectives, and then more traditional or old craft ways, such as the work of Gemma, her books on Devonshire folklore and magic, West Country folklore and Cornish folklore, etc., are incredible resources, and I will leave a number of resources below that you can check out, many of them from Troy Books, and it's highly worth reading a few of those. Andrew Chumbley, the founder of the cultus Sabati, a coven based in the UK and hailing from Essex, also had connections with Cornwall and came to be fascinated with some of the old craft ways and cunning traditions of the area. The tradition of Gemma is a modern tradition, modern folk tradition. However, it is based on a lot of the folklore that was gathered, although much of it has of course been lost over time. Many of the practices of the cunning folk and the folk charmers and the pellers of the region, much of it was collected by the likes of William Bottrell and Robert Hunt in the 19th century. Thanks to them, a good amount of folklore and superstition and belief was recorded. Much of what is showcased in the museum, of course, is what has been found within the region and in Devon within the West Country. And as already discussed, the practices would have been so varied, and really it is impossible to put labels on the practitioners, because a lot of the practice would have leaned into working with spirits of the land, etc., as I've said, and also there would be that Christian influence as well. And so it's likely that each practitioner would have very different ways of practicing. However, there is a kind of through line that we can see, and much of the folklore collected helps us to see what kind of charms were used, and oftentimes they were for healing warts or maladies, and wart was essentially like an illness or something like a malady, not just a wart, but also to protect one from ill wishes and the evil eye, so to speak. A lot of it as well would have been about protecting assets and people's way of living and their livestock, and that of course would have been their farmland and their animals. And so a lot of the charms and magic, spells, etc., prayers would have been to protect those animals. There likely would have been some practitioners who believed that in order to heal their client would have needed to have a belief in a Christian god, a Christian deity, and other practitioners may not have believed that, but it would have been magic by any means necessary. So through divination, the use of plants and charms and prayers, conjuring spirits, the laying on of hands and energetic healing practices. And of course, they would have used whatever it was that they had at their disposal. So many of these items were household items, such as a broom or a pot or a kitchen knife, and found objects in nature, sticks, stones, roots, bones, etc., and then working outside within the hedge, utilising water, etc. And the power of being within those liminal spaces in order to step beyond the hedge and to take flight into the land of spirit, to connect to spirit and to conjure. There is a saying in Cornish witchcraft to gather sprowl, and it's similar to kind of energy, but it's drawn forth from the land, and it's to empower one's craft. And so to walk the serpent path to gather such sprowl for use later in one's work. And so much of that would involve crossing the hedge, working in liminal spaces, going into trance, etc., and ecstatic states. There would have been a lot of work with animals as well, of course, as well as the witch's fetch spirit, and occasionally used synonymously the witch's familiar, which is actually distinct from the witch's fetch. I would like to talk about that in another video, but essentially familiar spirits, and then the Bucca and the Bucca Dhu and the spirits of Cornwall being a kind of old one or a manifestation of the devil, as it were. And there was of course much in the way of folk tales of ghosts and spirits. The piskies, a type of fae that were seen as ghostly beyond life in the other world and were highly protective. Piskies were like other fae creatures you may have heard of, such as brownies, and they often would reside in homes and would help the home's owner to carry out chores, etc., if they were treated well. So they would be kind and helpful to those who were kind to them. However, they would definitely be troublesome and mischievous to those who did not treat them so kindly. The Furry Nights are the Cornish Wheel of the Year, if you will, and include the winter and summer solstice, which are known as Montol and Golowan, respectively. The period of time around Lunasa and autumn equinox was known as Guldees, and then into Samhain, which was Allantide, and then Imbolc was Candlemas, of course, and then the spring equinox was in between, and Bealtaine would have been May's Eve. So you can see how the neo-pagan Wheel of the Year fits in around the Cornish traditional years, and actually these celebrations do work really, really well with the land. Guldees was the Feast of Ricks and the Cornish Harvest Festival. Allantide, of course, was November's Eve, Samhain. That brings me to the end of the vlog. I really hope that you enjoyed it. As you will see, we spent the rest of the day visiting some witchy shops in the area and then visiting another coastal town where we had dinner, and it was just so beautiful in Cornwall. I would highly, highly recommend visiting if you are able to, and if you're interested, there are a number of books on the topic of Cornish witchcraft and Devonshire witchcraft and folklore as well, and as I said, I will link recommended reading below. It is obviously a specific practice rooted in the land and the area, but highly worth reading about and learning about because it may inform your practice if you resonate with it. Thank you again so much for joining me. I hope that you've enjoyed this. Please like the video and share. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And if you'd like to support me, you can find me on Instagram, an old TikTok page, and then there's Patreon if you would like to support me that. goes a long way to support the work that I provide over here. So thank you so much for being here. I hope you are well and safe, and I look forward to seeing you again in another video really soon. Take care. Many blessings. Bye.